You know what? I think they can actually hear you, Dee. Okay. Hello and welcome to yet another. Not the show with no name anymore, is it? We established that last week. It's the cave now. Right. So tonight then we are focusing on the physics of sub-ohming. This might last the majority of the hour. So get your learning hats on. And firstly, let's get the titles out of the way, shall we? See you in a moment.
Joytech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.
Hello. Right, and as you'll see, no, up there is Mr. D. Goatee. Say hello, D. Goatee.
Hello, D. Goatee.
Hello. Right then, so unfortunately D's not in the studio with me tonight. He is, however, in his man cave. So we got two caves for the price of one this evening, which is great. Right, as you're no doubt aware, the last time we tackled this subject, chat decided to die on us. And I'm probably tempting fate, and it'll probably happen again this evening. But that'll be fun, won't it? So, D, do you want to start from the top? After a vape.
Right. Sub-ohming. Wonderful fun. In fact, we've actually been doing a little bit more testing since we last spoke the other day. One of the things with sub-ohming, One of the things with sub-ohming that a lot of people miss is the fact that there's a lot of hidden resistance that needs to be added into the Ohm's law calculation. This is present in the resistance of the mod, the battery, all the connections in between the 510, the button, and the lot, and that needs to be added into the calculations. Because where most people have been using Ohm's law these days is just purely for the coil. And as we all know, with Ohm's law, it's the entire circuit that has to be accounted for, not just the specific part of it that you like. And so a colleague of mine, a Hungarian vape reviewer who goes on YouTube under Darth Vapor, well worth a watch if you can understand Hungarian.
He's a nice guy, though, even if you can't understand it.
Yeah. And hopefully he's going to be watching tonight. If he can, go home, China, you're drunk. But yeah, what we've been looking at is the resistance of various mods around. And we've been finding that basically, in general terms, most are somewhere between 0.2 and 0.5 ohms. Now, with these ones, we're talking, we've spent time polishing the threads, making sure they're all clean, because any dirt in there as well increases the resistance. Now, there's two types of power that we look at when we're looking at this. Part of it is what we call coil power, and that's the good stuff. That's what we actually vape on. The rest of it we consider parasitic power, which is what gets lost in the battery, the threads, the button, the switch, and everything else. And where these things matter is if your coil resistance is less than the combined total of the mod and battery, you're going to end up with a bit of problem in that the majority of the heat and all your lovely, watts and so on are going to go into the mod. Now, normally you don't really notice this much because the mod has got a huge dense area. It is in fact just a heat sink. So that gets lost. Whereas when you start going down to sort of these 0.2, 0.3, 0.1, and I dread to think about people going even lower. They do the Ohm's law calculation on the coil, and they say, hey, I'm vaping at 140 watts. Actually, when you consider the entire resistance throughout the entire circuit of the mod, you're looking, it's probably going to get closer to somewhere like sort of 40 or 50 watts, of which anywhere up to 45 watts can get lost in the mod and the battery. So you're actually vaping not at 150 watts, you're vaping at 12. What you're doing here is you're overstressing the battery, and you're not getting efficient usage of the power that's in there. So by optimizing your resistances, you can actually get the majority of the power through your coil where you want it, and not through your mod and your battery where you don't. Measuring the resistance for a mod is actually quite tricky, because what you've basically got to do is, in an ideal scenario, get a gold-plated copper dummy 18650 or whatever size battery and put that in place, and then use a precision measurement tool to measure the resistance of the whole device, including the battery. However, because we're talking such low resistances, most multimeters and things aren't really designed for this type of low resistance. But typically you're going to get somewhere with a good, well-maintained mod, somewhere between sort of 0.2 and 0.5 ohms. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly rather, some of the Chinese knockoff stuff is woeful. Some of it's actually surprisingly good. But either way, it's all down to do with contact area of the threads, where if you've got a long, fine pitch thread, that's obviously going to decrease the resistance. If you've got a short, rough pitch thread, that's going to be a lot more. Where the majority of the resistance...
Actually, by way of illustration, sorry, D.
Yep.
This is a very, very, should we say, not a very conductive thread. I don't know if that can be made out, but the size of the threads on that, look at that. It's a bit blurry, but yeah, just by way of illustration, that's...
I'm going to take your word for that. I mean, you know, as a thing, the Vamo thread, which you see here, is not optimal. It's okay, but again, a little bit of dirt on there, a little bit of wear on there, and it is going to get worse. You can obviously improve these things by using things like Nolax or another conductive grease, which will help maintain the connection better.
Just a quick point there, actually. The Vamo obviously is a regulated mod. So would I be right in assuming that if you've got dirty threads, the chips on the regulated mod have to do more work?
Yes, well that's the thing, is that they've got to overcome the resistance in the body and the threads to actually draw the power from the battery, but you're increasing the load on it. So while it will still struggle and output voltage correctly, it's going to drain a lot more power from the battery to do so. You typically find that if you've got dirty threads, that the bottom cap gets quite hot. It's typically apparent very much on regulated mods like the Sigeli, which has a live battery meter. The Sigeli 30 watts, the one I'm most familiar with. And when you fire that, you actually see the voltage drop on the battery.
That's right, yeah.
As you fire it. Now, it is amazing the difference you can have on that. If you fire it, and it'll come up, low voltage or whatever, if you're hitting it with a heavy load. Take a toothbrush, a bit of isopropyl alcohol, a few minutes, bit of Nolox, put it back together again, and you're going to have, you know, an extra 0.4, 0.5 of a volt to work with, which then means that your battery's not working as hard, the mod's not working as hard, and you're getting a more efficient vape. So thread cleanliness, I suppose, is one of the key aspects of efficient vaping. Yeah. I'm not going to use the word safe. Efficient, because that.
To be fair, I mean, vapors have long preached the virtues of making sure your mods are clean, spick and span, and everything's all nice and in working order.
Some do. Although to be fair, the majority of the ones I see on a daily basis, I work in the industry,
Yeah.
and a lot of the ones I see on a daily basis, some of them, you throw them into a cesspool and they come out cleaner.
I was quite impressed actually. The Pirelli P3 in the box actually come with a yellow leaflet, and actually did state on there the maintenance routine and perform it on a weekly basis. I thought that was
Yeah,
quite nice.
yeah, and I mean, this is something I would like to see coming with every mod, because obviously the cleaner your connections are, the less of a resistance it causes. The less of a resistance, the less the power has to work in getting through it.
Hmm.
But yeah, we're I suppose we're digressing here slightly.
We are a bit, aren't we? So apologies for that. I did sort of put it off on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, but thread. No, sorry. There's a thing in the chat actually about why not just measure voltage at posts when firing, then calculate with your coil resistance. Yeah, batteries drop a lot. You can't really get the resistance to the mods through easy means. We've done something which worked quite well for us. We got a stack of 5 pence pieces
Okay.
and polished and cleaned every single one of them. Stuck some shrink wrap around it and made a dummy 18650. And that worked really well. We got we had I think it was 0.01 of an ohm across that. So we could then put that in place of the 18650 and then use a 510 to 510 male adapter, which then let us use an ohm meter, which gave us a good indication, although not a precise measurement of the mod.
No, no.
Using that technique, then we got, we had to calculate for the resistance and stuff inherent in the connector, and also the resistance inherent in the 5 pence stack, as it were. But once we'd used that, it came across that we were getting some very surprising results. Some of the mods that we thought would be quite high were quite low. Some that we thought were quite low were quite high, and there was a massive difference between absolute massive difference between a clean mod and a dirty mod.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the big, huge things.
Okay. I see. Chat is quite busy on the subject at the moment, but I think we'll wait to the second segment now to actually really delve into the meat of the questions. There's quite a few there. I honestly, I don't think I can keep track of all of them. I don't know how well you're doing there.
Hope I sort of I'm trying to read them as I'm talking, sort of thing. It's I suppose I've got less things to control, so I've got a bit more time on it.
Well, that's the thing. I've got 3 screens in front of me here, and it's and the chat is far to my right. So I'm. Aye.
Yeah. I mean, there is a thing there saying, if you test across your coils as you fire it, you'll know what you're vaping at, and yeah, you pretty much will. But again, clean connections all the way up will help that. But the main thing is you still got to take into account your resistance, because that resistance combined with your voltage, that'll help you know what amps are running. And that's the important thing. Is a lot of the batteries out there these days, unfortunately, they're misleadingly labelled.
Yes, there have been a few cases of that, haven't there?
And while they may state they're capable of a certain number of amps or something like that, that's more just sort of for an initial startup of a device, and then just to run at a lower ampage from then on. Unfortunately, with vaping, it tends to be high amps, nothing, high amps, nothing, high amps, nothing, and that is quite stressful for a lot of batteries.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the 18650s were never designed with this in mind, were they?
No, typically 18650s are designed for things like LED torches and stuff, where
Yes.
you're going to have a heavy pull initially just from the startup, but then it's going to just stay at a nice steady draw from then on. There is a lot of nice, that they are improving, and certainly some of the batteries that we've been testing have been superb. However, some of the abuse these things are getting, if your battery's getting hot, it's the wrong battery for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can get around the amp problem is by increasing voltage. And this is where some of these new regulated mods come in, and they're absolutely fantastic, because you can get the same total watts, but by substituting voltage for amps. You know, you can running a 1.5 ohm coil, you can still get 50 watts through it, but you're not going to be drawing sort of 20-30 amps if you take the voltage up, because you'll get it through. I mean, this is sort of basics in a sense, in that we use 240 volt at home.
Yeah.
In most people's houses. But the power lines between cities run at sort of 10,000, 30,000 volts, because when you transfer electricity at high voltage, it just flows through the resistance without having to draw the huge amp draw that you need. If they were running 240 volts from the power station and stuff, there'd be such a huge loss. The wires would just basically melt in seconds.
Yeah. I mean, there's that famous story, isn't there, that during the ad breaks of Coronation Street, the power companies braced themselves for 20,000 kettles to be turned on at once, you know?
Yeah. And there's a comment in chat there from Heiko saying regulated mods still draw the amps from the battery. That's true, but they have a lot less circuitry and devices that take it through. Typically, there's less connections there. I mean, still, you need to keep them clean. But then, you know, for a lot of these ridiculously high power devices, they're going to use several batteries, so they're going to be drawing it from a higher voltage to start with.
Yeah.
You know, you're always better off going for volts over amps any day, in our opinion.
Okay. Right. I think at this point, what we do, we'll take the first ad break, and when we come back, we'll bring up the graph, and Dee will talk us through the graph once again. Okay.
No problem.
Back in a mo.
Joytech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.
Healthy Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and e-liquids. Proud sponsors of vaping entertainment on Vapor Trails TV.
Duitech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.
And we're back. And Goatee's just having a bit of a vape there, as you can see. Right then, shall we bring up the graph?
Please do.
Right, this isn't the neatest thing. You can see it's behind it, but, you know, it's visible. Right then, so, the graph.
Okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm still waiting for it to come up on my screen just so I can sort of remember what the colours used on it were.
Hang on, you made the graph. You should know.
Yes, I didn't actually make it. I adapted it
Right.
from one that was made for me. Right. Basically, what's shown on this particular graph is a typical Chinese device with various resistances and stuff worked out, plotted in a line. So we're looking at two colours here. We've got the blue line and the red line. The blue line is good voltage. Good watts, which are the ones going straight to the coil. The red line is what we term the parasitic. Now, I'm just having a little look here, and yeah, what we're looking at is on the far right of the graph. That's sort of typically is about a 3 ohm coil, and then as we move to the left, it's dropping down to a 0 ohm coil, which is a beast I really, really hope I'll never encounter. And what you can see is that the parasitic watts, as you start dropping down to 0, they come in very low. And you know they're almost insignificant until you cross that 1 ohm line. Once you cross that 1 ohm line, the parasitic watts shoot straight up. And what you have there is, you know, at sort of just about the sort of 0.4, 0.5 line, with this particular device that we'd measured, is the crossover point where suddenly you get even power in both the coil and the device, and this is where you start to get inefficient vaping. Once you go below that 0.4 ohms-ish, basically all you're doing is throwing away power, because you can even see that the coil power starts dropping again. Because you're drawing such high amps, it's all getting lost in the battery, in the threads, and most particularly where it really comes into the button. That's where the majority is, because unfortunately a button is a surface area.
Yes.
And these things get wear in them and so on like that. The buttons, you know, they wear over time. They're not perfectly smooth, flat surfaces, and what you get is an imperfect surface. Because it's only being pressure contacted quite lightly and so on like that, that is where you're going to get the majority of the heat. Now, anyone who's gone down to really, really low ohms and things like that has probably noticed at some stage or another that the button gets quite warm. This is what's happening basically, is your watts are going into the button, not into the coil. It's not necessarily dangerous, but it is a sign that something's not quite right with your balance.
Okay.
Typically, if you're sort of above 0.4, 0.5 ish, then you would expect the button maybe to get a little bit warm, but it's certainly not going to get hot. I don't think I need to remind most of the people here of that intelligent young chappie who likes venting batteries.
Oh, yes, we do like him.
Yes, Darwin would be proud of him.
Oh, he would, wouldn't he?
But you know, this is the sort of point is that by understanding that you've got to take everything into account, we're hoping to basically educate a new breed of educated vapor, I've been sort of vaping some very, very nice, and getting quite, sufficient vape at sort of about a point 0.7, point 0.8 ohm, which is reasonably safe
Hmm.
as long as you keep the threads clean.
Yeah.
That's going to keep, you know, best way of looking at it is the power is proportional. So if you've got a point 0.4 ohm coil and a point 0.4 ohm mod, and by saying mod, I'm including the battery, the switch, and all the threads,
Yeah.
then 50% of the total watts being turned into heat are going to be in the coil, the other 50% are going to be in the mod and the battery. If you've got a point 0.8 ohm coil and a point 0.4 ohm mod, 2/3 of the power is going to be in the coil, 1/3 is going to be in the mod.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it might not get hot quite as quickly, but what you're going to be doing is using the available power much more efficiently and putting the heat where you want it to go and not where you don't.
I'm sure we've all had that experience where you're using a device, a mechanical device or whatever, for an extended period of time, and then you notice all of a sudden it's quite warm.
Mm.
And you think, is it the heat from my hand doing that, or is it the battery heating up?
Yeah, and depending on the ohm of your coil, yeah, I mean, to a degree, even with the best, even sort of with a sort of 5 or 6 ohm coil on a stray back mod, you are going to get some heat in the mod.
Yeah.
But because I suppose the mass of the material in the mod and the battery and the switch is so much greater than the mass of the coil, you're not really going to notice that.
Hmm.
It's like spitting in a swimming pool.
Nice analogy. Right. Sav has very kindly been keeping track of chat for me. So I'm going to rattle through some of the questions that Sav's fished out for me.
Oh, goody.
Right. Andy Abrook, or the Fury, has asked, does using an ultrasonic potentially impede use, especially in the case of plated mods?
That's an interesting question. Depends the quality of the plating, really. If it's good solid plating, then it will clean it and improve performance. If it's like some of the plating I've seen recently coming from our favourite manufacturers, then chances are it's just going to strip it off.
Right.
Either way, if it comes off that easily, it probably wasn't a good conductor anyway, and it'll probably still improve it.
Okay, fair point. Okay, Leanna Lawless asks, what about heat and resistance? I presume she's referring to the graph back there.
Right, heat and resistance.
Yeah, that's all it says.
Okay, well, basically when you have a current flowing, the more resistance you have at any point, the more heat you'll have at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, a resistance or a resistor does pretty much what it says, in that it resists the flow of current.
Yeah.
And it turns power from electrical power into heat power.
Okay, right. Blaze asks, what internal resistance and mod resistance is this graph for?
Right, this particular graph is for. I could name the specific device if you like.
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
Right, this particular graph is calibrated on a Chinese Panzer clone.
Right.
With the purple EFES 2500 in it. You can find the internal resistances for most batteries online.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, there are plenty. The Battery University has some great information on how you can actually measure it and calculate it yourself.
I happen to know actually that Graham Gord is in chat, and I know he knows a fair few bits and bobs about batteries, so he might be able to chime in on that as well. I don't know if he wants to put anything in chat about that. But moving on, we've got another question. Entropy72 asks, is there any advantage in using a mechanical switch over a high current MOSFET setup, or vice versa?
Right. Again, great question. And believe it or not, a high current MOSFET is far superior to a switch.
Okay.
Mainly because there's no moving parts. So and there's no contact surfaces to get dirty, so you're not going to have the same loss. And in some of the high quality MOSFETs you can get these days, you can have the resistance down to sort of milliohms, whereas most sort of switches and things like that can be up to sort of point 0.1, point 0.2, even point 0.2. I've seen point 0.3 ohms in some mechanical switches.
Okay. Alright. All good food for thought here. I'm just having a look through chat now.
Yeah. Oh, Gary's joined in as well.
Aye, I'd expect the, Mr. Dibley to join in on this. I'm sure he knows a little bit about mods. Alright. Graham Gords does point out, don't buy eFest at all. Any thoughts on that?
I found them to be quite good, reliable batteries. Then again, I'm not going down to I generally don't tend to draw more than 8 or 9 amps from a battery.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not particularly thinking. There are some good eFests and there are some bad eFests. There are obviously clones appearing now more.
Wasn't it the nipple tops that originally had a bit of controversy about them?
Yeah, well, I think to be honest, a lot of them have had controversy. Certainly, some of the high capacity ones, like the 3,100 milliamp hour batteries, I think their stated current draw is about sort of 20 or 25 amps, but they're actually only about 7.
Oh, okay, yeah. Aren't they rewrapped Panasonics or something?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, pretty okay to use in something like a Vamo, but certainly not something you want to be using on a sort of a sub-ohm microcoil on a mechanical.
No. I mean, I generally only use these Sony VTCs on my mechanicals these days if I'm going below 1 ohm.
Yeah, and I mean, again, they're a good battery, but there's going below 1 ohm and there's going far below 1 ohm.
Well, you know me. I mean, I don't think I've ever vaped below 0.5.
Taha! I call shenanigans.
Do you?
I've got video evidence of you doing it.
Have you?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
From this very show about 4 weeks ago.
Oh, yes, that quad coil jobby, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right.
Shenanigans.
Yeah. I haven't actually vaped that since. It's still sitting there. Yeah. Here it is.
But yeah. So I mean, this is the thing. Is don't get me wrong. I've experimented a little bit.
No.
I've played. To be honest, I find it's just too uncomfortable to hold a hot mod.
Yeah. Yeah, and personally, I don't. I mean, whilst Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy does advise that you carry a towel with you at all times, I find it a little bit cumbersome sometimes. Not necessarily the correct situation to have a towel.
Yeah, and not only that, but when you're trying to hold a mod with a towel, something can slip out your hands.
Indeed. Aye. So let's take this the other way then, just as a talking point. There's a growing trend, of course, isn't there? Not for, say, sub-ohming so much on mechanicals, and whilst that is still a big thing, there's a growing trend of sub-ohming on a regulated device. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay. There are some very fun devices coming out these days. I had a look at one of these. I'll just say a triple battery device.
Not the God mod.
Yeah, it might have been the God mod.
Okay.
Now, it sort of does what it says on the tin.
Right.
But it does it in a very funny way. Now, first thing is these sort of things, they come into a whole other issue with stacked batteries.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And I don't know, maybe that's a subject for a later show. I had a little play with it, and I hooked it up to my scope. One of the first things I noticed is it doesn't put out a straight DC voltage. It's a very quick, and I'll give it that, it's the fastest PWM device I've seen yet.
Okay.
But it outputs 12 volts.
Really?
Or it outputs the full battery power, but just chops it up to give the equivalent output power. So I had a little play with it on one of my favorite drippers at the moment, which I've got coiled at sort of just slightly above 1 ohm, and yeah, you could tell it wasn't a straight DC voltage. Because yeah, that's 1 ohm. That's sort of having sort of 12 volts shoved through it, and so it is. It takes me back to the sort of the early days of mean vaping on some of the early devices.
Like the infamous gripper.
Yes,
That was a fantastic little device, though, to be fair.
yeah,
For its time.
yeah, I've got one in a box here somewhere.
You had a couple, didn't you, at one point?
Yeah, I have one here. The other one I keep for show and tell at work. But you know, the thing is with these is that because of I mean, they work quite well on a microcoil because that acts as a choke which sort of smooths things out a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
But it's on a normal type coil where you've got the winding space and stuff. You're going to really notice the roughness of it, where it's alternating between overheating and underheating. So it's never going to give a true smooth vape. But there are some good ones there as well. There is a lot of development, and I mean, certainly with this new sort of outcoming from the Volve, I think we're probably going to be moving completely away from Watt anyway. That's so 2013 now.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? I mean, is that the future? I wonder. Who knows?
Well, it's certainly an interesting direction.
Oh, right.
And there's, I mean, one of the things I suppose that is appealing to sub-ohming is just the huge clouds of vapor most people get from it. But in a way as well, when you look, and again, I'm not talking about vapors in general. I can only sort of speak for the ones I've seen myself. But a lot of them haven't sort of taken time to think about the airflow around the coil. And if you've got 2/3 of your coil surrounded and padded with cotton on the outside as well as the inside, you're only got a small area of the surface which is producing vapor.
I think actually, I don't know if you remember the show. Is I believe the week before you actually came in, I did a single coil dripper, and actually demonstrated that you can get a good vapor production from quite a high ohm device. But it's all down to the airflow in that instance.
Exactly, and I mean, it's because sort of, I mean, everyone has hundreds of thousands of tutorials about how to build a coil.
Yeah.
How to measure the resistance of a coil. We're now providing information on how to sort of get a rough idea of what your resistance is of your modern stuff. But where they fall down a lot is I've not seen a lot personally on how to wick correctly and how to wick efficiently. Again, maybe that's something that's
that actually ties in. I actually had a request earlier via Twitter, and thank you very much. The guys actually are putting requests in now, much appreciated. I've actually had a request in to go over different wicking materials and how to best use them, basically. So that is something I will be covering. To the best of my knowledge, of course. My experience is going to be different to someone else's, but the best you can really do is demonstrate what. Best I can really do is demonstrate what works best for me, and then you can take from that what you need.
One other little point is I've also been looking at, with low resistance coils. One of the things is people generally tend to use a very, very thick wire.
Yes.
Now, a thick wire has got a large mass.
Yeah, that's going to take more time to heat.
Yeah. And that sort of basic. When you fire a thick wire of a low resistance, you've got a lot of metal in there, which really, really needs to take time to heat up, and it moves slowly.
On the other side of that coin, once you fire it a few times, it retains the heat, of course.
Yeah, and that's good, but the thing is that because, again, some people don't realize that it retains the heat. They want the hot hit on the first go.
Yeah.
Um, they tend to sort of over abuse the power for the first hit.
Yeah.
So rather than taking a couple of weak draws and then having your cloud, you want to start with a cloud. And don't get me wrong, I want to start with a cloud. And reducing the amount of material can help massively. Now, you've probably heard of the G-plat wire.
Yes.
And the whole controversy that surrounded that.
Oh yes.
But we've been playing a bit with some stainless wire for coils. Now it's got the advantage that it's got a lower resistance than Canthal.
Okay.
So you can use a thinner wire, so it'll heat up much quicker.
All right.
For example, a 0.3 stainless works out somewhere in the region of equivalent resistance to 0.42 Canthal. So by using the stainless, which is a thinner wire, you've got less mass to heat up, so it'll respond a lot quicker. So you can play around with reducing the mass that you've got to heat up to get the heat out quicker.
Basically, a lot of this boils down to your preferred style of vape, doesn't it? You know, for example, when I'm vaping on a Genesis, now we know that Genesis work best after a fair few hits because you've got the stainless steel mesh to heat up, you've got the coil to heat up, and then you've got the deck and the chamber and everything else that all heats up. And once that gets to the right temperature, you get a really, really good vape. But the first couple of draws you get off one, not really as good until it really gets going. So it does depend on your vape style, a lot of that.
Yeah. And, you know, well, I like to show off a lot on a day-to-day basis.
Do you really?
Occasionally. But, you know, it's fun just to try and, you know, with these twisted wires, another handy little trick. You can lower your resistance, but you don't have the extra mass.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, sort of the ideal coil would be thin wire with a low resistance, because it'd heat up incredibly fast, but it would also, you know, okay, it would also cool down very fast, but the thermal performance would allow you to get that immediate vape that you want.
That brings us on nicely to the DNA 40, doesn't it?
Yes, I guess it could.
Not that we've got any to show off, but, you know, I mean, you've got the nickel 200 wire there is thin, very low resistance, and the DNA... Yeah, I've heard as much. You know, it's very hard to actually fashion that into a decent microcoil. You know, a lot of people are having trouble with...
Surprisingly, actually, I found it ridiculously easy.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I've not tried it, so I don't know. But what that will give you is, because it heats up very, very quickly, and because the DNA 40 is limiting that top end temperature to what you set it at, you're going to get a more instant satisfactory hit.
Yeah. I've, you know, it's well, one of the things I particularly like about it is it's a bit softer. So I sort of did my microcoil as normal, and then thought, well, hang on, I don't really feel like sort of heating it up and squeezing it with tweezers, so I just squeezed it together with my fingers while it was still on the form, and it stayed there.
Right.
I've never had anything do that, but you know, but then again, you know, using it on not a DNA 40 is basically, as I think we were told earlier on, it's just going to pop immediately.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Right, I need to take another ad break now. When we come back, I've got a few more questions that Sav has very kindly pulled out of chat for me.
Oh, goody.
So we'll cover those. And apologies, people, if you're expecting a Beyond Vaping episode tonight. I didn't advertise it because I wasn't sure how far we'd take it, but we're going to skip that segment this week. So it'll be back as per normal next week, okay? So anyway, on to the ad break. We're back in a moment.
Joytech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.
Often imitated, never duplicated. Award-winning service and products from cloud9vaping.co.uk.
Vapers, do you love discovering new e-liquids? Tell Dripper the types of flavours you like and they'll send you 5 gourmet juices each month. Experience new and exclusive flavours, all with a money-back guarantee and free delivery anywhere in Europe. Dripper.co.uk.
Joytech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.
And we are back. Right then. So, Sav has nicely pulled out a couple of juicy questions from chat for me. Graham Gords asks, or states, should we say, these multi-cell mods should be coming with custom balanced chargers to suit the amount of cells they use.
100% good point.
Yes.
One of the dangers of using a multi-cell battery setup at any stage is that if the cells get out of balance, it's going to cause trouble. My personal feelings on that is anyone who uses a multi-cell device should measure the battery voltages independently before and after use.
Yes.
Try and keep a set that sets that you revolve through a specific device. Because that way then they came from the same place, they're manufactured at the same time, so they should have reasonably similar characteristics.
Yes.
But if they ever do start getting out of whack, split them up and start using them in single cell devices.
I'll tell you what, one of the tools that I think is invaluable in a vapor's arsenal is a labeller. And all my paired batteries are labelled. Labelled, say, A1 and A2, B1, B2, so I know they belong together.
Yeah, and that's absolutely brilliant practice. I do the poor man's method of that, where I use a marker, but then cover it with a bit of sellotape to stop it getting rubbed off.
Either's good, but I just like another toy. It's an excuse to buy one.
Well, as per everything, you deserve the best.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, right. So Entropy72 asks, if you're outputting 12 volts pulsed as PWM, this is going back to the God mod, I presume, even though you're going to get a mean wattage through the duty cycle, aren't you going to burn the crap out of your juice of each pulse? I would say probably not.
Yes and no. You're probably gonna crud your coils up a lot quicker, because a very thin layer is going to get heated very, very quickly. But the heat is going to dissipate quite quickly as well.
But again, going back to the thick coils, the thick wire, again, that's going to retain the heat. So you got a higher chance of burning it on a thicker wire.
At the risk of going a little bit sciencey,
go for it.
There's a thing called an inductor in electronics.
Yes.
Believe it or not, it's a coil.
Yes.
And what it does is, and I won't go too deep into it, it basically resists change in voltage. So if you charge the coil up to 12 volts and then you switch off the power source, it's going to fight and try and keep 12 volts in that coil. If, however, you've got no volts in there and you try and hit it with 12 volts, it'll try and resist the change up to 12. So in a way, that will smooth it out a little bit. The fact it's a very, very fast PWM means it's a little bit better. I mean, we all know about the rattlesnake hiss, should we say, certainly in the early versions of the Vamo, for example.
Yeah, and the Z-Max and all those early ones.
Yeah, and that's because they were running at sort of like, somewhere in the region of, I think, 30 hertz or something like that, which is sort of 300 times a second. With this one, it is the fastest PWM I've ever seen.
Okay.
So it's the pulses were absolutely minuscule, so it's not really going to have enough time to heat it up particularly hot, but each successive pulse will do that.
At the risk of causing a bit of controversy, and feel free to tell me to bugger off on this one, haven't you tested a variant at some point?
Variant, I have.
And I believe you told me something about the PWM on that.
Right, to be honest, I've completely forgotten that. Jog my memory, if you would, please.
It wasn't that quick.
Oh yes, it wasn't. Yes, some are quick, some are slow. But yeah, that was more towards a Vamo.
Okay, and
more
that's
more power, yes. But the performance overall was more akin to a Vamo on steroids.
So yes, at the risk of causing controversy and someone that spent £500 on one.
I would rather vape, shall we say, no, I'm not even going to say that because that's
okay, fair enough.
That contravenes the no swearing in on screen rule.
But ultimately, we're maybe losing sight of the fact that ultimately we use these things to not use tobacco anymore. So if it's keeping you off tobacco, fine.
I use it because it's much better.
Well, yeah, there is that as well, but it's much more fun.
I just enjoy it more. Yeah, it is good fun, and I noticed there's some talk in chat about oscilloscopes under beds.
Oh, aye, Blaze has got an oscilloscope under his bed.
Yeah.
Okay, is that to measure for the resistance of boogeymen?
Possibly. I've heard they can be quite high resistance, but
yeah. Okay, right. What we're going to do now, we're going to do the up and coming shows bit, and then we'll have a little bit of banter for a few minutes, and then I think we'll call it a night.
Yeah, unless there's any last minute questions. I suppose.
If you want to get any questions in before the adverts run, you've got just under 3 minutes. So we'll see you in a second.
RY4 Radio.
Now, in fact. Oops, I need to get used to this playlist feature in Wirecast. Okay, right. So, you know what, honestly, did you see any other questions come up in chat there, D?
Not really. There's a lot of talk about smuttiness in regards
oh yeah,
frequency of things.
Yeah, Gary Dibley's involved, which I mean, it's the cleanest chat on the planet. Because Gary Dibley has the purest mind I've ever encountered.
To be fair, and you know, someone who makes that many tips would need to.
He would. I believe that on occasion he's got quite a hot tip before he tins it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, it brings new meaning to just the teep.
Right, so everyone don't forget that tomorrow night is actually Marco and Gary with Vapor Scene as opposed to Dave Dawn, who is who at that point will be in or maybe on his way back from London from the e-cigs summit. But we all saw Dave Dawn's show last night, didn't we? So and it was good, and he showed us footage from the knees meet and teased us with DNA 40 footage. Good. Okay, right, so sincerely hope everyone's enjoyed the show and it's given them food for thought. And huge thank you for D for coming on once again.
Pleasure to be here as always.
You'll be seeing more of D, I'm sure.
It was very nice of you to have me, Mr. Matthew Jerish.
Don't you do that. Otherwise I'll say your full first name. Right. Okay, so yeah, Beyond Vaping will be back next week. Apologies, just simply couldn't fit it in tonight. We wasn't sure what the runtime was going to be on this this whole topic, so I played it safe and tentatively had it towards the end. But Very Boring himself was due to appear on the show tonight with us, but we had some issues with Skype, so unfortunately we didn't get Very Boring's input on this as well. And I know he had a few points to raise about the new Aspire coils. I think they're selling sub-ohm coils now.
Oh, those things.
Yeah, they're doing 0.5 and 0.8 ohms or something, aren't they? So I know he had a few concerns about those. And I know he would have wanted to make his point about measuring resistance correctly, again, as he did in the show before. So I think we'll call it a night, don't you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Thanks for putting up with my ranting, everyone.
It's been great. Okay, guys, I'll see you next week. Cheers.
Joytech UK are proud sponsors of vapetrails.tv.